For 9 years, Owen Parker turned a division that was bleeding money into the strongest profit engine at Blackthorn Dynamics. He kept the hardest clients from walking away, rescued contracts that everyone else had already written off, and carried the weight of an entire department on his back without ever asking for the credit. Then, in a meeting attended by the whole company, Chief Executive Celeste Blackthorn pointed to her nephew, a young man fresh out of business school, and told Owen flatly that from now on he would report to him. Owen did not argue. He set his employee badge on the table and walked out. 6 months later, Celeste showed up at his office, begging for help. Owen Parker arrived at the Blackthorn Dynamics Tower in Chicago before almost anyone else, carrying his own coffee instead of letting an assistant fetch it, wearing a suit that had seen more winters than most of the junior staff had years of employment. He did not need an entourage to be recognized, because the recognition had already been earned through 9 years of showing up when things fell apart and staying invisible when they went right. That morning, like most mornings, 3 major contracts inside his division called for his attention at once, and one of them was already threatening to unravel entirely. A transportation software rollout for a client worth $80 million had stalled, and the client was hours away from invoking a termination clause. Owen did not summon a committee or draft a memo blaming the technical staff. He pulled the engineering lead, the legal counsel, and the operations manager into a single room and refused to let anyone leave until they understood the actual problem rather than the symptom everyone had been chasing. Within one short meeting, Owen recognized that the failure had nothing to do with the new platform his team had built. The client's own legacy systems were feeding in corrupted records, a detail buried 3 layers beneath the surface complaint. He got on the phone himself, walked the client's operations director through the discrepancy line by line, and persuaded them to hold off on cancellation for 48 hours while his team built a workaround. It was the kind of save that never made headlines, the kind that simply kept the lights on for hundreds of employees who never knew how close the whole account had come to collapsing. Watching how people gravitated toward Owen throughout the building, it became clear he was not merely a division head on an organizational chart. He was the person who settled disputes before they escalated, who remembered which engineer thrived under pressure and which one needed a quieter assignment, who knew instinctively which clients wanted hard numbers and which ones needed reassurance delivered like a conversation rather than a report. Owen kept a small notebook on his desk, not for show but for memory, filled with details most executives never bothered to track. Which client's operations director had a daughter starting college, which engineer had just come back from parental leave and needed a lighter rotation, which vendor had quietly saved the division from a shipping disaster 2 winters earlier. He believed competence without context was hollow, and he built his reputation not on grand pronouncements, but on 1,000 small acts of attention that added up to something resembling trust. When a junior analyst made a costly error in a client forecast, Owen did not escalate it to human resources or hold it over the young man's head in a performance review. He sat with him after hours, walked through the mistake line by line, and sent him home with a clearer understanding of the model rather than a wound to his confidence. Stories like that traveled quietly through the division, the way real reputations always do, without press releases or company-wide emails announcing them. Northstar Division had once been considered the weakest unit inside Blackthorn Dynamics, a place executives were quietly relieved not to be assigned to. 9 years under Owen's leadership had transformed it into the operation with the highest client retention rate in the company and a source of nearly 40% of total operating profit. Celeste took credit for that transformation in press interviews and investor calls more often than she mentioned Owen's name at all. And for a long time he let it go, telling himself that a stable team mattered more than a headline. During a short break that afternoon, his phone buzzed with a call from his daughter, Leah, a 19-year-old sophomore, attending college 2 states away. She asked, a little nervously, whether he could make time for a virtual presentation that weekend, and Owen promised he would be there, no matter how the week unfolded. He had raised her largely on his own since losing his wife years earlier. Though the story of his household never needed to dominate the story of his career, it simply explained why he understood, better than almost anyone in that building, what it meant to carry something heavy without complaint. Later that same week, a calendar invitation appeared in Owen's inbox for something called a special restructuring session. It had not come from Celeste. It had come from Tristan Blackthorne, a man who had never spent a single day working inside Northstar and who was, as far as Owen knew, still finishing his final semester of business school only months earlier. Tristan arrived at Northstar carrying himself like a man who already owned the place. He brought 2 outside consultants with him, and within his first hour he was demanding that staff prepare reports on what he called the outdated processes holding the division back from real growth. In his first sit-down with Owen, Tristan asked nothing about clients, nothing about staffing risk, nothing about the fragile agreements Owen had spent years nursing along. He wanted to know whether revenue could climb by 25% inside 2 quarters, as though the number itself were the entire strategy. Owen explained, patiently and without condescension, that Northstar handled complex, high-margin projects that carried real operational risk, and that pushing growth too fast would overwhelm the implementation teams and break promises made to clients who trusted the division precisely because it did not overpromise. Tristan smiled thinly and told Owen he had the thinking of a middle manager, then rattled off a handful of frameworks from his coursework, insisting Northstar's success had been a matter of favorable market timing rather than any one person's judgment. Owen did not take the bait. He walked Tristan through the division's risk dashboard, the list of accounts requiring close monitoring, and a 6-month staffing plan built to absorb shocks before they became emergencies. Tristan skimmed it for a few seconds and dismissed the whole thing as, in his words, spreadsheets built out of fear. Tristan's consultants filled the walls of the borrowed conference room with printed slides showing growth curves that bent sharply upward, the kind of chart that looked persuasive from a distance and meaningless up close, since none of it accounted for the specific engineers who would have to execute the plan or the clients who would have to tolerate the pace. Owen studied the slides without visible irritation, asking a single question about which accounts the projected growth would come from. Tristan waved the question away, saying the details could be worked out later, that vision mattered more than arithmetic at this stage. Owen had heard variations of that sentence before, usually from people who had never once had to explain a missed deadline to a client who was already skeptical of promises. He said nothing further in the meeting, choosing instead to document his concerns in writing afterward, the way he always did, so that if the plan failed later, there would be a clear record of the warning having been given honestly and in good faith. Marin Shaw, Northstar's operations director and Owen's closest lieutenant, tried to defend the reasoning behind the dashboard, only to be cut off mid-sentence. Tristan announced that from that point forward, every report handed to him would be reduced to 3 figures: revenue, contract velocity, and staff utilization, nothing else. Within days, he had claimed Owen's private conference room for himself before any formal appointment had even been announced, and he instructed Owen's assistant to reroute client scheduling to his own calendar, even as he skipped half his meetings in favor of long lunches with prospective investors. Celeste knew about all of it and chose not to intervene, because she wanted Owen to feel his footprint shrinking on its own, believing that pressure alone would make him accept his diminished role without a fight. It was Marin, not Owen, who first discovered the internal memo scheduling Tristan's formal announcement to the entire company. The title listed on the document read Executive Vice President of Northstar, a rank sitting 1 level above Owen's own. No one had discussed the decision with him at all. The annual strategy meeting was held in the largest hall in the building, filled with senior leadership, board members, and hundreds of employees watching from their desks through a live feed. Owen had assumed, perhaps naively, that Celeste would at least speak with him privately before making any announcement of that magnitude. Instead, she chose to turn his demotion into a public spectacle, a demonstration of authority. Delivered in front of an audience, large enough to make resistance humiliating. Celeste opened by calling Northstar the crown jewel of Blackthorn Dynamics, then invited Tristan onto the stage beside her. She announced that Tristan would take responsibility for reshaping Northstar for what she called a new era of growth. Owen would retain his title as division head, she said, but every significant decision would now require Tristan's approval first. In front of hundreds of colleagues, she turned to Owen directly and told him he had done fine work, but that building a division and leading it into the future were two entirely different skills. Owen asked, in a level voice that carried through the silent hall, whether she was asking him to remain accountable for results while handing the actual decisions to someone else. Celeste answered coldly that from that day forward he would report to her nephew, and that a genuinely loyal employee would not treat the arrangement as an insult. Tristan added that Owen still had plenty to learn if he could just adjust his thinking, a remark that drew a wince from several executives seated nearby, though Celeste mistook their discomfort for quiet agreement. Owen walked up onto the stage, unclipped his badge, and set it down in front of Celeste without raising his voice or threatening anything. He told her she had every right to choose who ran her division, just as he had every right to choose whose authority he was willing to work under. Then he resigned, effective immediately, and offered to complete a full handoff of documentation as required by his contract. Celeste laughed it off, certain he was staging a negotiation for a raise and had building security walk him out to prove that no one, however valuable, could challenge her authority and remain standing afterward. As Owen passed the Northstar team on his way out, no one clapped and no one objected, because the room was still too stunned to react at all. Celeste watched that silence and told Tristan with satisfaction that by Monday morning everyone would have forgotten Owen had ever worked there. The hall stayed quiet for a long moment after the doors closed behind Owen, the kind of silence that settles over a room when everyone realizes at once that something irreversible has just happened. A few executives exchanged glances but said nothing, unwilling to be the first to question a decision Celeste had made so publicly and with such evident confidence. Outside, in the parking garage, Owen sat behind the wheel of his car for several minutes before starting the engine, not out of regret, but out of the strange, unfamiliar quiet of no longer being needed by anyone in that building. He drove home without turning on the radio, replaying the morning, not with anger, but with something closer to relief, the particular relief of finally setting down a weight he had carried for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. On Monday morning, Tristan opened the division's operating systems and found every document exactly where it should be, every process fully outlined, every handoff completed to the letter. What none of it could tell him was who to call the moment a major client abruptly threatened to pull out of an active rollout, because that kind of knowledge had never lived inside a folder. It lived inside a man who was no longer answering his phone for Blackthorn Dynamics at all. Owen had taken nothing with him when he left. He had not copied a single file, deleted a single record, or reached out to a single employee to follow him out the door. He had left behind everything the role required, on paper. What Tristan discovered within days, however, was that a manual could describe an ordinary process, but it could never replace 9 years of judgment built through handling the situations no manual anticipated. When Halcyon Freight, the division's largest client, requested a call with Owen about a data discrepancy threatening their rollout, Tristan announced that Owen was no longer necessary and personally ran the meeting instead. Rather than acknowledge the severity of the problem, he delivered a polished presentation promising completion 3 weeks ahead of the original schedule. Grant Whitmore, the blunt and unsentimental chief executive of Halcyon Freight, listened carefully and understood immediately that the young man across the table did not yet grasp how serious the underlying risk actually was. To prove that Owen had simply been overly cautious, Tristan began dismantling the very safeguards that had kept Northstar stable for years. He canceled the weekly risk review meetings that had once caught small problems before they became public failures. He pushed engineers already stretched thin onto additional new projects Without adjusting timelines, he reassigned two of the division's most experienced specialists over to the sales team, chasing new signatures instead of protecting existing delivery. He rewarded staff for the number of contracts signed rather than the quality of what got delivered afterward. He instructed employees never to bring up Owen's name in meetings, as though the mere mention of him constituted disloyalty. He also stripped Marin of her authority to pause a project when the data did not add up, a power she had used sparingly but decisively for years. Employees who had once felt free to flag a problem the moment they spotted it began keeping their concerns to themselves, watching colleagues get reassigned or quietly reprimanded for raising exactly the kind of warning Owen had always welcomed. A culture that had taken 9 years to build began eroding within weeks, not through any single dramatic decision, but through the accumulation of small signals that honesty was no longer rewarded the way it once had been. Meetings that used to run 20 minutes because everyone trusts the numbers on the screen now stretched into hours of hedging and careful phrasing as staff tried to describe real problems without sounding like they were undermining the new leadership. Marin noticed the shift first in the body language of her own team, the way people glanced at the door before speaking freely, the way enthusiasm curdled into caution. She kept doing her job as well as she could, but she began saving copies of every email exchange, sensing that the ground beneath all of them was no longer as stable as it looked on paper. When Marin warned him that one of the newly signed contracts relied on data that had never been properly validated, Tristan accused her of clinging to what he called Owen's bureaucratic legacy. Owen, meanwhile, returned to a quiet apartment where his phone, for the first time in years, did not ring constantly with work emergencies. He sat through Leah's entire virtual presentation without interruption, something he had rarely managed before, and afterward she asked gently whether he regretted what he had done. Owen admitted he was worried about what came next, but told her that a job could pay someone's bills, though it was never entitled to take a person's self-respect in exchange. He did not rush into another position. Instead, he spent several weeks revisiting old offers he had once turned down out of loyalty to a company that, it turned out, had never truly returned that loyalty. A former client introduced him to a group of investors searching for someone who could rescue struggling technology firms from the inside, and Owen accepted a small consulting project entirely unconnected to Blackthorn Dynamics. While Owen quietly helped a new client recover a contract everyone else had assumed was already lost, Northstar received its first serious blow. Halcyon Freight froze an $18 million payment after the division missed a critical implementation milestone, a failure that would have been unthinkable only months earlier. Rather than acknowledge that Tristan's decisions had caused the collapse, Celeste insisted publicly that Owen had built a system so dependent on one person that he had deliberately engineered the company's failure after leaving. She ordered the legal department to investigate him for any wrongdoing. The investigation turned up nothing at all. There was no evidence of stolen data, no deleted files, no employees Owen had contacted, no clients who had signed with him, and every access credential he once held had been surrendered exactly according to policy. Celeste's fury only deepened because she could not manufacture a betrayal that had simply never occurred. Talented people began leaving on their own without coordination or encouragement from Owen. A technical director resigned after Tristan publicly blamed him for failures caused directly by Tristan's own compressed timelines. 2 account managers left for competitors soon after. Owen refused to hire any of them himself, unwilling to give Celeste even the appearance of poaching. Marin stayed behind out of a sense of responsibility to the people still on her team, carefully documenting every warning she sent to Tristan through the company's official channels so there could be no confusion later about who had raised the alarm and when. In one meeting, Tristan declared that Owen Parker had convinced everyone the division could not survive without him, and vowed to prove he had never been special at all. Moments later, a screen at the front of the room lit up with notice that a second client was now formally requesting an exit from their contract. Owen's first consulting engagement succeeded well beyond expectations, saving the client company from millions in potential penalties. and word of his work spread quickly to 2 additional businesses in similar trouble. He founded Parker Ridge Advisory, a lean restructuring consultancy, hiring a small team of specialists drawn from a range of industries, deliberately avoiding anyone tied to Blackthorn Dynamics. His reputation grew because he did not simply hand clients a diagnosis and walk away. He stayed embedded with their teams until the underlying systems were actually fixed. Grant Whitmore eventually reached out directly, careful not to ask Owen to disclose anything confidential about his former employer, and, instead simply asking whether Parker Ridge might provide an independent assessment of the Halcyon rollout once the existing contract term expired. Owen agreed, on the condition that every legal boundary be respected without exception. Celeste came across a trade publication praising Parker Ridge for rescuing a struggling logistics firm in under a month. She tossed the article aside and dismissed it as luck, unwilling to entertain any other explanation. Julian Cross, the chairman of the board, quietly kept his own copy. That same quarter, financial reports showed that for the first time in 9 years, Northstar had not merely missed its targets, but had recorded an outright operating loss. Celeste ordered the finance team to delay presenting the figures to the board. Determined to prove he could deliver a signature win of his own, Tristan pursued a contract with Redcrest National, a major retail chain, seeking a complete overhaul of its distribution systems. It would be the largest deal in Northstar's history, but the proposed timeline bordered on impossible. Marin and the technical team calculated that the division could only realistically take on the work if it delayed 2 existing contracts or brought in additional specialized staff. Tristan rejected both options because either would have shrunk the profit margin displayed on his own report. He told Marin that Owen had trained everyone to look for reasons to say no, while he intended to teach them how to win instead. Celeste approved the contract anyway, eager to announce it publicly before an upcoming meeting with investors. What followed was a chain of compounding mistakes. Tristan pulled staff off the still-troubled Halcyon account to redirect them to Redcrest. He instructed the technical team to skip a full testing phase in favor of a flashy demonstration built on sample data instead of live systems. When one manager discovered that the progress figures in an internal report did not reflect the real state of the project, Tristan removed him from the assignment entirely rather than address the discrepancy. Marin escalated a formal warning directly to Celeste, who forwarded it to Tristan without reading it in full. Tristan then pressured Marin to sign off on the project's readiness. She refused and instead filed a memo with the compliance department documenting exactly why. In the days leading up to the demonstration, the engineering team worked through consecutive late nights, trying to compress months of proper testing into a fraction of the time it required, running on takeout food and nervous energy rather than confidence in the product they were about to show a client. One senior engineer quietly told a colleague that the platform was not ready, that they were essentially gambling with a client relationship that had taken years to build, but neither of them felt safe repeating that assessment out loud in front of Tristan after watching what had happened to the manager removed from the project weeks earlier. The night before the presentation, someone ran a final check and noticed an inconsistency in how the warehouse inventory numbers were syncing across regions, a flaw that under normal circumstances would have triggered an automatic delay. The warning reached Tristan's inbox at close to midnight. He read it, decided the presentation would proceed as scheduled regardless, and told the team to prepare a manual workaround just in case, a patch rather than a fix, applied under pressure and without proper review. During the live demonstration in front of Redcrest's executive team, the system failed to synchronize its warehouse data in real time. Tristan tried blaming the client's own network connection, but Redcrest's own engineers quickly traced the failure back to a configuration error inside Northstar's systems. Redcrest suspended the contract and triggered a clause demanding the return of its advance payment. News of the failure spread quickly through the industry. Halcyon Freight, already uneasy, grew convinced that Blackthorn Dynamics no longer had the staff needed to finish its own project and issued formal notice of termination. Two other clients requested independent audits soon after. In the emergency meeting that followed, Celeste did not confront Tristan at all. Instead, she turned on Marin and the division's remaining longtime staff, demanding to know how much longer they intended to use a man who had left 6 months earlier as an excuse. Marin set a full file in front of her, containing every warning Tristan had ignored along the way. Celeste refused to open it and demanded Marin resign on the spot. Marin answered calmly that no one needed to fire her because she had already submitted her resignation that same morning. Her departure triggered a wave of exits that followed with no coordination or conspiracy behind it. Each person simply recognized they were being asked to absorb consequences for decisions that had never been theirs to make. Northstar lost nearly a third of its senior staff within 3 weeks. In the weeks that followed, the mood inside Northstar's offices changed in ways that had nothing to do with revenue figures. Desks emptied out gradually rather than all at once, leaving gaps that nobody rushed to fill, and the hallway conversations that used to hum with the energy of people solving problems together grew sparse and guarded. Tristan spent less time on the floor and more time behind a closed door with outside consultants drafting explanations for the board rather than solutions for the clients, still waiting on delayed deliverables. Celeste, for her part, began avoiding investor calls she had once handled with practiced confidence, delegating them instead to subordinates who had no real answers to offer either. The building itself seemed to lose some of its color. The easy hum of a place that used to function like a well-tuned machine, replaced by the low static of an organization, quietly bracing for something it did not yet have a name for. Julian called an emergency board session. When the chief financial officer was asked how much operating cash the division had left if Halcyon's claim for damages succeeded, the answer was blunt: less than 8 weeks. Parker Ridge did not occupy anything resembling a lavish headquarters. It filled 2 modest floors of an older building, but the atmosphere inside was focused and respectful in a way that Northstar had once been and had since lost entirely. Owen had built the firm around a handful of simple principles. The person accountable for an outcome had to hold the authority to make the decisions behind it. Warnings about risk were never treated as disloyalty. Achievements were credited publicly rather than absorbed by whoever sat above them, and no contract was signed unless the team taking it on could actually deliver. The company was steady rather than sprawling, but it was profitable, and its reputation was spreading fast through word of mouth alone. Owen had spent the months since his resignation rebuilding something from almost nothing, hiring carefully, turning down clients whose timelines seemed built for headlines rather than results, and insisting that Parker Ridge would grow only as fast as its people could sustain without burning out. He kept a framed photograph of Leah on his desk instead of any industry award, and he made a habit of eating lunch with whichever team happened to be struggling that week, rather than retreating to his own office. The firm's early wins had not come from aggressive marketing or flashy pitches, but from a slow accumulation of trust. One rescued contract at a time, one honest conversation at a time. By the time Celeste's car pulled up outside, Parker Ridge occupied both floors comfortably, its walls still mostly bare, its culture still young but already unmistakably different from the one Owen had left behind. Celeste arrived without any warning at all. 6 months earlier, she had ordered security to escort Owen out of a building he had spent 9 years building up from nothing. Now she sat in a modest reception area and waited for him to finish another meeting before she could even get 5 minutes of his time. She opened by pretending to be generous, telling him she was willing to overlook the manner of his departure. Owen said nothing in response to the gesture and simply asked what she actually needed. Celeste offered him his old role running Northstar, doubled his previous salary, promised a bonus tied to saving both the Halcyon and Redcrest accounts, and told him Tristan would keep a senior title while staying entirely out of day-to-day operations. The offer revealed just how little Celeste still understood about what had actually gone wrong. She wanted Owen to shoulder the responsibility once again, while her family retained the authority and the credit that came with it. Owen told her plainly that North Star could not be saved by placing him back inside the same broken structure that had failed it in the first place. Celeste's composure cracked, and she reminded him that she had given him his chance years earlier when he was still an unknown manager with no real name in the industry. Owen answered that she had given him a title, and in exchange he had handed her a division worth billions of dollars, so neither of them owed the other anything further. What she had done, instead, was destroy whatever respect had once existed between them. When she threatened to make sure no client would ever feel safe working with Parker Ridge again, Owen simply slid a folder across the table toward her. It was not a lawsuit, and it was not evidence assembled for retaliation. It was a set of formal letters of intent from Halcyon Freight, Redcrest National, and 2 additional clients, each stating a willingness to sign or resume work, only if North Star were separated from Blackthorn Dynamics entirely and placed under an independent leadership team headed by Owen. He was not there to negotiate his way back onto someone else's payroll. He was preparing to acquire the very division Celeste had allowed to collapse. Celeste laughed it off, insisting he could never afford to buy it. Owen told her he did not need his own money for that, only enough people who still believed the division was worth saving. The door opened behind her, and Julian Cross walked in, accompanied by representatives from 2 investment funds. Julian informed Celeste that the board had launched an independent inquiry after discovering she had delayed presenting the company's true financial losses. The findings were damning in their simplicity. Celeste had known Tristan lacked the experience for the role and handed him full authority regardless. Numerous internal warnings had been ignored at every level. Progress reports for the Redcrest project had been misrepresented before they ever reached investors. Celeste had concealed the true scale of North Star's losses for months. Her continued insistence on keeping Tristan in place had directly cost the division clients who refused to negotiate as long as he remained involved. The board, Julian explained, faced 2 paths forward: pour more capital into North Star and risk a wave of litigation, or sell the division to an investment group led by Owen, preserving jobs and limiting further damage to shareholders. Celeste tried one last accusation, claiming Owen had simply waited for the division to weaken so he could buy it cheaply. Owen produced his entire record of communications, proving he had never approached a single Blackthorn client until they came to him first, and that every term of his involvement fell strictly within his contractual boundaries. He had even offered a price above the value of a straightforward asset liquidation because he wanted to keep both the staff and the North Star name intact. The accusation of sabotage collapsed entirely under its own weight. Tristan was summoned into the room next. He blamed the staff for failing to adapt and accused Owen of having planted a culture of resistance before he ever left the company. Marin entered as a witness for the board's inquiry, laying out emails, internal memos, and risk reports that Tristan had dismissed one after another. He could not deny any of it, since every document carried his own electronic signature. Julian asked him a simple question. Over the past 6 months, how many major client meetings had he walked into without someone else preparing his answers in advance? Tristan had no answer to give. Owen did not demand a public apology from Celeste. His conditions were practical instead. North Star would be separated entirely from Blackthorn Dynamics. Employees who had lost bonuses because of leadership's failures would be compensated fairly. Staff who had already resigned would be free to reapply without any retaliation. Tristan would hold no position of any kind inside the new North Star. Parker Ridge would take over operational leadership. A meaningful share of ownership would be reserved for longtime employees who had kept the division running through its worst months. Julian announced that the board had already voted informally in favor of the deal. Celeste realized, sitting there, that her visit to Owen's office had never been a job interview at all. She had arrived as someone begging for rescue, while Owen had already become the partner the board needed to persuade, not the other way around. Celeste played her final card, declaring she would use the family's voting shares to block the sale outright. Julian set another resolution in front of her instead, one calling for her immediate suspension as chief executive over the concealment of material information from the board. Celeste called the board members who had once stood firmly behind her, only to find that mounting losses and the looming threat of litigation had eroded whatever loyalty remained. The Blackthorne family still held a substantial ownership stake, but not enough to shield Celeste from an emergency vote called on short notice. She was suspended from her role as chief executive pending a formal review, and Tristan's employment was terminated the same day. He reacted with fury, insisting Celeste had promised to protect him no matter what happened. For the first time, Celeste seemed to understand that the nephew she had elevated above the entire company had never once prepared himself for the consequences of failure. That evening, alone in his office long after the board members had gone home, Owen sat with the folder of signed agreements in front of him and felt none of the satisfaction he might once have imagined he would feel. He thought, instead, about the engineers who had worked those brutal nights before the Redcrest demonstration, about Marin's careful documentation that no one had wanted to read, about the ordinary people who had simply shown up to do their jobs inside a structure that had stopped protecting them. Rebuilding a division was not, to him, a matter of proving a point to Celeste or savoring her defeat. It was a matter of making sure the next version of Northstar could not be dismantled by a single person's ego, no matter how much power that person happened to hold. He called Marin that night, not to celebrate but to start planning, already sketching out the shape of a leadership structure that would not repeat the mistakes of the one before it. Owen did not celebrate their downfall. He understood that hundreds of innocent employees still had their livelihoods hanging in the balance, regardless of what had happened to the people at the top. He spent the following days negotiating directly with creditors, clients, and investors to make sure the acquisition could actually close on solid footing. Grant Whitmore agreed to withdraw Halcyon's demand for damages if Northstar resumed the project under Owen's direct oversight, and met a new, realistic set of milestones. Redcrest agreed to return as well, on a smaller scale and with far more reasonable deadlines than the ones that had caused the original disaster. Between those two agreements, Northstar's value stabilized just enough to avoid the bankruptcy that had briefly looked inevitable. Before the acquisition papers were finalized, Celeste asked Owen for one last conversation. She wanted to know whether he had planned all of this from the very day he resigned. Owen told her honestly that he had never expected Northstar to fall apart at all. He had only known he could no longer defend a system that had stripped him of both authority and dignity in front of the entire company. Celeste said quietly that he could have warned her. Owen reminded her that he had, right there on that stage, when he asked whether she expected him to remain accountable while someone else held the actual power to decide. She had called that question disloyalty at the time. She had no answer for it now. Before she left, Celeste asked one final thing, whether he felt satisfaction taking back a division that had once belonged to her family. Owen told her that Northstar had never truly belonged to any single person, and that her failure had come from believing ownership of a company was the same thing as owning the talent working inside it. The deal was signed not long after, and Owen faced one last challenge of his own, walking back into the building he had once been escorted out of under guard. 6 months after that humiliating exit, Owen stepped back into the old tower, and this time there was no security detail waiting to walk him out. The employees who remained gathered in the same hall where Celeste had once announced his demotion. Unsure whether Owen intended to lecture them, replace them, or tear the entire structure down and start again from nothing, he stood in the exact spot where Celeste had once declared he would answer to her nephew. And, rather than dwell on the humiliation of that day, he simply announced that Northstar would be rebuilt under independent leadership with a new program granting equity to the people who kept it running. Marin returned as Chief Operating Officer, this time with clearly defined authority that no one could quietly strip away again. Some former employees came back as well, while others chose different paths entirely, and Owen respected every one of those choices, without exception. He told the assembled staff that he had not returned to prove Northstar could never survive without him, but to build a version of Northstar that would never again depend on a single person, quietly absorbing every burden alone. He asked that crisis response be distributed across the team rather than concentrated in one office, that client relationships be shared rather than hoarded, and that every risk warning be documented and taken seriously the moment it was raised. He had learned, through his own costly mistake, that becoming indispensable might make a company successful for a while, but building people who could stand on their own was the only thing that made an organization built to last. A year later, North Star had recovered most of its former clients. Revenue had not yet returned to its previous peak, but profits were steady and dependable again. Staff turnover had dropped sharply. Halcyon completed its long-delayed rollout on the new, realistic schedule without incident. Longtime employees held equity in the company for the first time in the division's history. Parker Ridge now operated as the parent firm overseeing North Star's leadership, and Owen held the title of managing partner rather than returning to life as someone else's employee. Leah sent her father a short message after reading a business article about the acquisition, telling him that this time the story had finally credited the right person for building it. Owen smiled, set his phone aside, and walked into his next meeting with the team that now stood beside him rather than beneath him. Celeste had once believed Owen needed the chair she had granted him out of her own generosity. Only after she took it away did she finally understand that he had been the one holding up the entire room all along.